We want to have this idea that we're blank slates, but we're not. We're really not. We're coming into this work with a lot of experience and a lot of background and the lens that is influenced by our addressing model. And as you understand your own worldview, it helps for you to focus on your client's worldview as well, so that you can develop some culturally responsive or culturally appropriate, culturally expansive worldviews. And for us, it's also a lifelong commitment to learning, to understanding, right?
This episode is brought to you by TherapyNotes, TherapyNotes.com. For the past 20 plus years, I've been working in the mental health field as a licensed therapist, private practice owner, coach, and consultant. And I've learned a lot the hard way, and I don't think you need to do the same. Hi there, I'm Gordon Brewer, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts. Whether you're just starting out, expanding your practice, or looking for fresh inspiration, this podcast is here to support you in your journey. Each week, we explore the real-world challenges and opportunities that come with building and growing your private practice. From marketing and money management to ethics, client care, and self-care, we cover it all. You'll hear from leading experts, seasoned clinicians, and innovative voices in the mental health and allied health fields, all sharing their insights and strategies to help you thrive in your practice. So let's jump in and get to today's episode of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Welcome to the podcast. This is episode number 434 of the Practice of Therapy podcast, and I'm Gordon Brewer. Glad you've joined us for this particular episode, and hope you'll take time to follow us or subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. Looking forward to you hearing my conversation with Dr. Phebe Brako. This was such a great and refreshing conversation on just really diving into the importance of how we might need to change our work when working with people that are much more diverse than we are, or people that might be of a different culture, might be of a different background, all of those kinds of things. And I think it's something maybe, I know we talk about it in just cultural competency and all that sort of thing in grad school and being aware of those things, but I was going back and listening to our conversation we recorded earlier this month, but one of the things that really stuck with me about that conversation is the importance of naming the elephant in the room, so to speak. And so I'm looking forward to you hearing from Dr. Phebe, and yeah, it was just a really good conversation, and I'm looking forward to you listening in on that. And before we get to that, though, I'd love for you to take some time to go over to the website, practiceoftherapy.com, and click on that button up there that says Coaching and Consulting Services. And if you're interested in working with me one-on-one, one of the things I'm really concentrating on this year is working with people individually and helping them with their practices. You know, I think there's a lot of different ways you can go about getting help with your practice. And certainly there's a lot of different consultants out there and people in the kind of the field of helping with private practice. But what I have found works best for me and what my clients seem to enjoy is just that one-on-one attention. And so if you're interested in working with me, I'd love to have that conversation with you. And you can just begin by filling out a short application, just telling me what your goals are, what you want help with. And then we set up a free 15-minute brainstorming session to talk about what it is that you'd like to get help with. And then we decide together if I would be a good fit for you and doing some ongoing consulting, or if not, I try to point you in the right direction. So it's a win-win situation either way around. So anyway, I invite you to do that. And also, before we get to my conversation with Phebe, I'd love for you to hear from our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes.
Hi, this is Rachel, Gordon's podcast assistant, and I want to share the platform Gordon trusts for his own practice, TherapyNotes. TherapyNotes is the highest rated EHR, practice management, and billing software for mental health professionals. It's an all-in-one system for scheduling, notes, billing, and secure client communication. And if you ever need help, their 24/7 customer service is always just a call or email away. Their latest update, Therapy Fuel, uses AI to streamline documentation, generating progress notes, creating contact notes from client messages, and even summarizing client history forms, saving therapists hours every week. Are you ready to give it a try? Head to therapynotes.com, click Start My Free Trial, and use the code Gordon to get your first 2 months free. See why TherapyNotes is the most trusted EHR and the one Gordon chooses for his practice. Please enjoy the rest of the show.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm really glad for you to get to know today Dr. Phebe Brako. Welcome, Phebe. Glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me, Gordon. It's truly an honor.
Yes. And so I'm looking forward to our conversation just about how we can work, change some of our or modify some of our theories, the ways in which we work with people to be more attuned to diverse populations. And so, Phebe, as I start with everyone, tell folks a little more about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed.
Absolutely. So I am a licensed therapist. I'm licensed in Washington State, Washington, D.C., and in North Carolina. You can say I have a thing for the Washingtons. I've lived in Washington State for over a decade. Love it out here. It's so beautiful. And I'm also an immigrant from Ghana. So I've lived in the U.S. since 2007, came to college, and I've stayed here this whole time. And so the work that I do has really been informed by my experiences just living here as an immigrant, as an international student on an F1 visa, and also as just a Black woman who's existing in a system that has not always been designed to serve, protect, or provide for us. So that has been the backdrop of the work that I do. And so it has led me into creating a group practice in the Washington State, Tacoma, Seattle area called 253 Therapy and Consult. So we serve, all the different populations that you can think of. And it's been an honor just watching it grow over the last 5 years.
Yes. And that's I know that's so needed because I think we tend to, with the work that we do, we tend to just kind of put everything in some nice, neat little package, but it's not always applicable to different populations and different people with different backgrounds and cultures and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. And that is what has led to a lot of the conversations that I have, not only with my team, but I also teach on the graduate level. And so I have that conversation with my students a lot around how can we better serve the clients that we're seeing, because we're seeing also that a lot more people are going to therapy. A lot more people are trying to find therapists who understand them. We're having a lot of conversations about encouraging people to seek services as needed, and also just trying to make sure that we're opening up the doors, right? And just breaking down some of those barriers that get in the way of people recovering and healing.
Yeah. So I, of course, got my curiosity up, but I think probably there's some people that are listening to this that are thinking much the same way and that this just doesn't quite fit. So as Esther Perel says, where shall we begin? What kind of led you to this, and what were some of your aha moments with figuring all this out?
Yeah, I really love theory. I love clinical theories, and it's one of the first courses that I actually taught as an adjunct faculty at Antioch University. And one of the first things that I realized very early, actually, when I was in grad school, was that a lot of these theories were not written for people like me, or they were not written with people like me in mind. So I think about how we describe symptoms. I think about how we talk about different family systems. I'm a trained MFT, so systems was the thing, right? And I think actually that's how
Yeah.
I got introduced to you years and years ago.
Yeah.
I think you presented at one of those MFT events or AAMFT,
Okay.
something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
And so yeah, so I'm in grad school. We're doing clinical theories and counseling theories, and I just realized that I would always feel this lump in my throat whenever we were describing ideas of family, what family looks like, what a quote unquote healthy family system looks like. So that was when the seed was planted. And at the same time, as a graduate student, I knew that I needed to understand these things in order to apply them and also graduate, right? So for those who are graduate students and are listening, there is a time and place for all of this exploration. We can push back and bring up some of these concerns that we have, and we also have to be tactical about how we have some of these conversations. So I also want to acknowledge that a lot of the pushback that I have towards clinical theories also is grounded in some privilege in being where I am today in my career, being independent of a lot of these different things. And also, having the power and the privilege of being an instructor, right? A faculty, adjunct faculty member. So that was what kind of brought all of these things up and helped me really start understanding or exploring why our clinical theories needed some sort of like cultural modification, I would say. And the big thing there is that these theories, these clinical theories, were developed from a Western lens, right? And they were developed within Western contexts. And at the same time, our field, it seems, has not really been able to keep up with a lot of the diversity needs that we have as a society and the ways in which our society is changing and has continued to change over time. And so we forget sometimes that cultural norms are going to impact or play a role in the kind of symptoms that we're going to be seeing. So, for example, you have a client who is coming to you and is struggling with some decision making. And as a Western trained clinician, you're probably thinking, I'm here to empower my client or, help them with that self piece. And not realizing that for some clients, decision making is not necessarily a solo thing, right? Decision making can be influenced by, or they will probably go to other family members to include them in that conversation because they are a community. So decisions are not made on a solo level, they're made on a community level. And so that client is probably looking for support around being able to hold all of the different opinions that they're receiving and not just trying to figure out how do I make this decision, right?
Right.
And at the end of the day, we have to also recognize that historical trauma and all of these systemic inequalities and inequities that we faced as a society and as a world are also going to play a role in our mental health. So, how do we continue to do this work? How do we continue to function within our private practices or in our group practices and forget or not hold the reality that it's not just about our theories. We can't go into this just, this is what, Bowen says. And so this is how we do it.
All right.
There's a shift happening.
Sure. Can you give us some examples of some ways in which we can augment or change some of our theories? You pointed out, I'm an MFT too, so I'm really into systems, and I think, it does make sense that our Western ideas of a family system is much different than it would be in other parts of the world.
Yeah. How do we do it? We need to begin by starting to examine our own worldview, right? Sometimes in our classes, we talk about our different worldviews and how it shows up in the client interactions. And some therapists, I've realized, have not paid attention, especially those of us from like older generations, have not really paid attention to what we call our addressing model, right? All of our different intersections, our intersectionality, our different identities. And so as a professor or as an instructor, one of the first things that I do with my students is sharing my addressing model, right? I let them know my age, my gender, like all of these different things, because we want to have this idea that we're blank slates, but we're not. We're really not.
Right.
We're coming into this work with a lot of experience and a lot of background and the lens that is influenced by our addressing model. And if you're not familiar with the addressing model, it's called the Hayes addressing model. You can do a quick search about it. But as you understand your own worldview, it helps for you to focus on your client's worldview as well, so that you can develop some culturally responsive or culturally appropriate, culturally expansive worldviews. And for us, it's also a lifelong commitment to learning, to understanding, right? An example of that is we get certified in IFS and we just stay there, right? You learn, oh, hey, these are the different parts. This is what we're used to in terms of parts, right? Or we get trained in CBT. We're thinking about our cognitions, our emotions, and we get stuck in that and we forget that this is a lifelong thing. And so just because we learn these theories doesn't mean that we don't have to modify them or start asking ourselves, okay, so if we're going to challenge our client's thoughts, where does that leave room for the reality that my client might be experiencing some systemic oppression? And is that a place that I really want to challenge? Or is that a place that I really want my client to challenge? Because then we're essentially challenging somebody's experience and their lived experience, especially. Right. And so an example of that is really starting to do more research. And I'm also realizing that as clinicians, research feels scary for a lot of us, right? It feels like, oh no, that's more of like a scientific thing. But if we want people to really respect our field, we also have to get more into the research field as well. We need to dip our toes into what are the current findings, right? What are the studies on DBT with diverse populations? What does that look like, right? When it comes to systems theories, are there any studies that are happening right now? Because we need to be able to keep up with the newer developments, right? EMDR got really popular over the years. I'll say maybe like over the last decade, everyone is getting certified. Before you even get certified in some sort of modality, right? People talk about IFS and how hard it is to get, IFS certification and things like that. Before you do any of that, you have to ask yourself, what is the current research on this? And how does that research incorporate populations that are not cisgendered, white folks, or, especially like when we look at like different clinical research trials, even for like medications, things like that in different modalities. So we really have to take the time to look at how our theories are integrating or expanding to include populations that typically were not studied in the past.
Yeah.
So I think those are some of the examples that I can think of. And also, even as we're doing the addressing model for ourselves, that we're encouraging our clients to also do their addressing models. And we're sitting there with them just going through, like their age, their disabilities, immigrant status, race, gender, religion, because we need to look at our clients in a more holistic way instead of just what they're presenting to us. So helping our clients also look at some of those identities and look at how there's some intersectionality. And as we're going through those intersectionalities, we start looking at, okay, so if I'm thinking about using different CBT techniques, what do I need to be aware of as a clinician when I'm working with somebody who is from a historically marginalized population?
Can you give an example of that with CBT maybe?
Oh, yeah. So I love CBT. And one of the reasons why I love CBT, and I know it's kind of like almost anti MFT because MFTs are, anyway, I'm not even going to go there, but I use a lot of
CBT as well. So, I mean,
Yeah. So when we're talking about our clients' cognitions and we're talking about the different thoughts that they have about, or the different narratives that they have developed, the schemas they've developed over time, it's really important for us to start incorporating some of those, like for people who are from collectivist cultures like myself, what are those collectivist values and how are they shaping the things that our clients are thinking about or struggling with? So for example, your client is a professional. They're working in a place where they're really, really struggling and they just want to leave. They want something better, but they have this fear And so as a clinician, you're talking to them about, like, tell me about what it is what is the worry there, right? Well, I'm worried that, I'm going to, lose my job and I'm not going to be able to provide and all that. And, as a person who has worked this hard, I shouldn't be just jumping from job to job. And then in that moment, you're asking your client questions like, tell me a little bit more about that. And how does your culture play a role in this mindset that you have or this thought that you have, right?
Mm-hmm.
How were you raised to look at work and work ethics in your culture? Or so for myself, I'd say, like in Ghana, how do people interpret moving from job to job? What comes up for you when you think about the fact that you might have to go home and tell your parents that you have left a job? Right. Because we can't just look at it simply as, well, what is going on for you? Or how do you think you're going to fail? Or, like all of the different thoughts that people have when they're contemplating whether to leave a job or to stay on the job. We're not just focusing on what their thoughts are, what their values are. We're asking also beyond them, their family, their social circles, their community, right? Their immigrant community. Or looking at, the different circles that they roll in, because all of that is going to play a role in whatever our clients are believing. It's not just what's going on in their mind. And so started to explore some of those narratives around, work and work ethics, those cultural narratives, and how it's going to play a role in the beliefs that your client is holding. And also, even when you think about different like interventions, you have a lot of us think about mindfulness and we're like, oh, hey, like this is a great way to, to be grounded, all that. But we're also not providing any psychoeducation to our clients around why we're telling them to engage in mindfulness, or we're not looking at the root of mindfulness. If you have a client who seems to be not really into the mindfulness thing, are you taking a moment to ask, what is going on? I'm sensing some sort of reaction here when I bring up, taking some deep breaths. Are we putting into consideration our clients' needs around their religion, right? Because a lot of people are going to come to us with different religious beliefs. And sometimes a religious belief is not having any sort of like religious or spiritual beliefs, but how are they interpreting or how are they understanding the different interventions that we're using? So if you, for example, have a Christian and you're talking to them about, oh, hey, like you need to start doing some more relaxation and, go out and do some physical activity. And I'm thinking about some yoga and things like that. And you see your client cringing, instead of interpreting that as your client is maybe like resistant to the ideas that you're bringing to them, have you taken a moment to ask yourself, what is the resistance about? And also even asking your client, when I bring up yoga, you seem to not want to try that. And I'm curious about that. I'm wondering if there's maybe some interpretation that you have or some cultural beliefs that you have about trying yoga. And they might just say, I'm a Christian and I understand that yoga is from a different religion, and I'm worried that I would be practicing a different religion or something like that. And so you even asking them, okay, hey, so then the whole idea around mindfulness is trying to make sure that we are staying present. What do you do as a Christian to stay present? How do you integrate this into prayer? Or you have a Muslim client who's talking about prayer as well. How can you pray 5 times a day? How can you integrate this in a way that fits for you, in a meditative practice for you, right? And so you might even use the word meditation, and your client might be like, ooh, that's not it. We don't do that. So then what kind of language can you use? Because at the end of the day, if you're able to communicate the purpose of the activity or the purpose of that intervention and not gatekeep, because sometimes, I don't know, when I talk to therapists, it almost feels like they're worried about like explaining different interventions to their clients because they feel like their client might not need them again if they explain too much to them. Well, the whole idea is for your client to not need you.
All right.
Right. You want your only, and I tell my clients too, I've told my clients historically as well, I want you to get to a place where you don't need me. You don't need to talk to me, right? Like I'm just Phebe. I'm just me. I'm not anything like special or anything like that. And you live your life outside of here. This is only an hour of your life. Those 23 hours outside of here, super important. So you go figure out how you can do this when I'm not there.
Right. Yeah. I'm reminded, as you were saying all that, of a book that came out several years ago. It's called A Framework for Understanding Poverty, and it's written by Judy Payne is the author. And she was a sociologist and was just looking at the different values that people had. She used it in the context of different socioeconomic classes. I'm using air quotes here within the United States. And particularly around how people value possessions and what are possessions, for people that are maybe in generational poverty, whatever that is, that she pointed out that most of those people tend to see other family members as possessions. Whereas as you move up in economic status or whatever, it might be your possessions are like your car or your house or that kind of thing. And then up into the, kind of the ultra rich people seem to see their pedigree or their name, their good name as being their possession. That's just a small example that came to mind, and just thinking about understanding the way in which people see the world around them based on the culture that they came from.
Before we had AT&T Business Wireless coverage, our delivery GPS wasn't the most reliable. Once our driver had to do a 14-point turn to get back en route. A 14-point turn! An influencer even live streamed the whole thing. Not good for business. Now with AT&T Business Wireless, routes are updating on the fly and deliveries are on time. And the influencer did get us 53 new followers, though.
AT&T Business Wireless. Connecting changes everything.
The Ream 0 for 60 savings event is happening now, and these unbeatable savings won't last. For a limited time, get 0% financing for 60 months with approved credit on select new energy-efficient Ream air conditioners. That's right, 0% for 60 months, but only through May 31st. Don't wait until your system fails. Upgrade your comfort and lock in huge savings while you still can. Go to thereamteam.com right now to find a certified Ream Pro partner near you. That's the RHEEM team.com. Act fast and lock in your savings today.
Yeah, that is such a great example. I've recently been doing a lot of just reorganization because it's spring and I'm packing and things like that, and I'm seeing a lot of things that I've been holding on to, and I literally have my tickets from when I came to America in August of 2007. Right. And, as I talk to my friends about it, some of them are like, well, why do you hold on to all of these different things? Like, what in the world is that? And I imagine if I bring it up to my therapist, all that. And part of it is because I'm realizing that my folks back in Ghana did not have the privilege of holding on to some of this history. So while some people might look at it as hoarding, I'm looking at it as record keeping, because for years we were not allowed to keep these kinds of artifacts, right? They might look like material possessions, but for me, it's my history in America, and I want my kids and my grandkids and every one of my other descendants that are going to come my way to have things like that, right? And because there's a lot of meaning making around some of these possessions also, but at the same time, I'm also holding the reality of the name too, because I was raised in a family where the name was very important. And my mom would very often tell me, you better not go out here and embarrass me. People know me, right? And so it's like, holding on to like both. So it's, for me, it's not even like an either or change in status piece, but more of like again, different reasons for some of these things, right? Yeah. So as you're saying that was one of the things that came to mind as well.
Right. Well, I think too, just to your point, I think when people come to us is getting really curious about their worldview, about how it comes to be that they see the world as they see it. And it's, and I have to be really cognizant of this a lot, because number one, I'm male, so there's not as many male therapists out there. Number two, I'm white from the South. All of those things have an impact on your client as well. And going back to what you said earlier, it's just being aware of your own worldview and your own biases. And again, I think taking a curious approach with people just goes a long way in helping with that.
It really, really, really does. And I appreciate you naming that. And one of the things that I always encourage my students, I teach a lot of practicum and internship classes. So folks who are graduate students who are seeing clients, and that is one of the things that I encourage them to do is, name those things. Even for me as an immigrant, if I have a fellow Ghanaian immigrant come to my office to talk to me, I'm naming that piece of, hey, we might be from the same place, but I want to recognize that we're not going to, I want to name that we're not going to have the same or the exact kinds of experiences because we may have immigrated at different points, right? I came as an almost adult. I mean, legally adult, but I didn't feel like an adult when I first came into this country. And, this immigrant may have been brought here as a child. And those are two very, very different experiences. And so again, back to the topic of like intersectionality and looking at all of our different identities and naming those things and saying those things. It's such a breath of fresh air when you're working with somebody and they name they name the elephant in the room and make it known that they're not there to really like make assumptions. And I've had that experience personally with a business coach, actually, who I was terrified to work with because he's a white male. And he was one of the very first people that I started working with years ago. And that was one of the first things that he said. I was like, oh, okay, so we're naming the privilege, we're naming all of the different identities, we're naming all of the ways in which we're different, but also similar. All right, I think I can trust you and I can feel safe. And it was such a wonderful experience. And I mean, till today, I keep up with him every now and then. It was amazing. So we do have that, we have that responsibility as clinicians to say some of these things out loud because your client is probably thinking about this and might even have some anxiety around it. And also not just because of who you are, but what you represent, because people are going to have different experiences from other clinicians. They're going to come into sessions with a preconceived notion, as well. And that's going to play a role in the dynamics that exist in the room, And one of the things that I've also noticed over time, just in working with I've worked with a number of therapists, as with me being the client I'm a huge believer in therapists going to therapy.
Yeah,
I think I'm one of those like lifelong therapists,
same.
clients.
Yeah.
And over time, I even look at different, as therapists are doing their different interventions in the sessions, I look at the different examples that they even use and, things that they bring up, again, with the assumption that for example, seen that movie or heard that song. So it might seem really trivial, but it can play such a role with your clients. And it almost becomes like a core memory for them. Because I remember a clinician that I worked with in the past who brought up, oh, well, like in the Brady Bunch, and then they're making all these like, examples or trying to like tell me something about it. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, who's the Brady Bunch? Who are the Brady Bunch? But again, it was such an innocent example that this was used, right? And so how do we modify that when we're working with diverse populations? I say things like, I'm thinking about this show, called This Is Us. Are you familiar with it?
Yes.
And then using that as my example outside, and that would be the opposite of trying to provide an example with a client and making the assumption that they know exactly what you're talking about because, well, you live in America. How do you not know the Brady Bunch?
Yeah.
I still don't.
Yeah.
I still don't.
Yeah. Plus, so, your age has something to do with that as well. So
exactly, right?
Yeah.
There's that part too, and so a lot of times we give examples. And I think what has kind of hurt in the past, even within the therapist community, is when different examples or different references are made or people say different movie quotes or whatever. And I say, wait, what is that? And they're like, what?
Yeah.
You've never seen blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, I wasn't born in America. I wasn't raised in America. So no, I don't know. What? And it seems so innocent, but for people like me, it can be impactful because in that moment I'm thinking like, what made you assume that I would know this? And why did you not approach me with a little bit more curiosity? And why are you reacting as though like everybody should have seen or played Street Fighter, right?
Yeah.
Like, that sort of thing. It just feels very ethnocentric in some ways because then I could think about different examples of shows and things that I watched or participated in as a child. And I never make that assumption that people in America would have seen or watched those things,
Sure. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
great. That's great. Yeah, I know. So something else you said just a minute ago that I think is so critical, particularly when you're working with someone that you know is obviously from a different culture or whatever. And then that's naming the elephant in the room. I can remember had another interview earlier today, and we were talking about how COVID changed things with
Oh, yes.
so many things. But I had, and of course, back during COVID, we were pretty much 100%. And I had a person to contact me. This person lived in Memphis, Tennessee, which is the opposite end of the state for me. I'm in Northeast Tennessee, and Memphis is on the other end of the state. It's 8 hours away. People think, oh, Memphis, Tennessee, you're in Tennessee. Well, it's as far to Memphis as it is from me to Washington, D.C. So, I mean, it's just that far away. But the lady that contacted me was Black, and I was just blown away by that. And so we spent a whole session around, okay, here I am, a white Southern male, and you're a Black lady from Memphis. How in the world did you decide on me? This has got to be awkward for you. And I can't remember all that we talked about, but what it did at the very beginning is establish some really good rapport in that you acknowledge the obvious differences in the very beginning, and being, like you said, doing a little bit of self-disclosure about, my concern was for her to feel safe. Working with a white therapist, a male white therapist. And that was my biggest concern, which I can't even remember. It's been so long ago, but what her, what all the issues were around that. But I love that you brought that up. Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely do. And I mean, I could give so many examples of the elephant in the room. And I've worked with clients who, even though they're from similar backgrounds as mine, there's so many differences, and it gets to be a teaching and learning moment for both of us. I've had a client who left Ghana at a pretty early age, and so they're not too familiar with our native languages. And so one of the things that they ask every time we meet, or every time when we used to meet, is, oh, hey, can you start off with a greeting in our language? And so in so many different beautiful ways, it became a language lesson, even for this client.
Wow.
But people would have probably assumed, oh, well, you both are from Ghana, and so you're probably getting along, and not realizing that there is this part of the conversation or this piece where they are, in naming that elephant in the room, that I have a larger, more extensive diction of our native language, and they don't. And so I can't even go into the session just making assumptions about that and start speaking my language and saying different proverbs, because we use so many proverbs and we have so many stories. We use a lot of storytelling in our work. And so I can't even go in doing that because, oh, this is a fellow Ghanaian. They might not even speak my native language, because we have hundreds of different languages.
Sure.
Right. So that is definitely something there. And even when I think about, back to the topic of modifying theories, I also think about how we interpret family and interpret boundaries and interpret family connections, right? I think about the concept of even like enmeshment in family systems, and how the first time I heard that, I was like, wait, what? Like, this doesn't make any sense, because this feels like a very typical family system in my culture, where there's a lot of shared emotions, there's a lot of shared thoughts, and because it's communal. And so I was one that always pushed back against that. And at the same time, if I'm working with a family where the system has essentially developed here in the US, it's going to be very, very different, because they're not going to have those familial ties that I had because I grew up in Ghana. And so I can't even bring that assumption into our work together. And just think that just because I involved my family or my elders in my decision making or in how I felt about different family members, that doesn't mean that this Ghanaian family here is even going to be doing the same. So again, there has to be that modification, and we have to find that middle ground. And the ways in which we do that are going to be through questions and curiosity, and also just putting some of these things out there and just naming them, right?
Sure.
For folks who do a lot of like attachment theory, one of the ways in which we have to modify our thoughts around that, or modify the work that we're doing. And the theory is also looking at what communal caregiving looks like, right? When it comes to attachment, and how do we shape that in a way with our interventions and with our questions to where we're meeting our clients' needs, right? Looking at those cultural norms around independence versus interdependence. What is the role of the extended family even also? And again, not making those assumptions, because you're going to have folks who are going to be from different parts of different countries, and extended family is going to look very, very different for different people.
Yeah. Phebe, this is a great conversation, and I've got to be respectful of your time, and I hope that we can continue the conversation another time. But tell folks how they can get in touch with you and connect with you if they're interested in finding out more.
Yeah, absolutely. I am on social media. I like to yap around there a lot. I'm on Instagram and on Threads as at Dr. Phebe Brako. That's ThebeBrako. And I'm also online at www.phebebrakolmft.com. And so that's my website. You can find me on there. And honestly, if you just put my name in Google, something is going to come up one way, shape, or another.
Okay. Well, we'll have those links in the show notes and the show summary for people to get to easily. But this has been a great conversation, and I'm so grateful for you for being on the podcast.
Absolutely. It was an honor. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, again, a big thanks to Dr. Phebe Brako for joining me on the podcast. And be sure and check out her things in the links here in the show notes and the show summary. And I hope you found that a refreshing conversation. I know I did. And just really being honest with ourselves about how we're diverse in our world, but at the same time, so much the same. And so anyway, thanks to Dr. Phebe for joining me. And also big thanks to our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes. They are the leading electronic health record system for mental health providers. They're who I use in my practice, and I'm constantly impressed with all the improvements that they make to their product and the things that they do. It's pretty amazing how on top of things that they stay. We just absolutely depend on TherapyNotes in our practice, and it's really the hub of our practice as far as our clinical records, appointment scheduling, filing insurance claims, all of that sort of thing is all there on that platform. So be sure and check it out. You can go to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes, and be sure and use the promo code just Gordon, GORDON, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. So be sure and check it out. And also, if you're interested in working with me on a one-on-one basis, I'd love to talk with you about that. And again, if you'll go to the website, practiceoftherapy.com, and click on that link up there that says coaching and consulting, you can find out more about that and what it involves. So be sure and do that. And do take time to follow us or subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. And thanks again for joining me, and we'll be back again next week for another episode of the Practice of Therapy podcast. You have been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free Private Practice Startup Guide at practiceoftherapy.com. And to find more great podcasts like this one, please visit the PsychCraft Network at psychcraftnetwork.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. And if you need help in these areas, be sure to find the right professional to help you with these things.
Hey there, it's Wayfair here, where delivery and setup are as easy as a few taps on your phone. You're relaxing in an old hammock, scrolling Wayfair's app, when you spot it, a brand new patio set. Next thing you know, Wayfair delivers it right to your patio and sets it up. Oh, you need a new grill too? All right, Wayfair's got you covered. With Wayfair's Room of Choice delivery and fast expert setup on qualifying orders, life gets a little easier. Visit wayfair.com or the Wayfair app.
Wayfair, every style, every home.